Okay, so this time I'm going to be talking about insomnia and sleep and improving people's quality of sleep, and how we as herbalists might be able to help people who need help with sleep. We talked a little bit about sleep before when we were talking about supporting the nervous system, and that is a big part of it, but I also want to get into some other stuff as well, because sleep involves not just the nervous system, but it involves every system of the body. Every system in the body does things differently during sleep, does things a little differently during sleep. And because of that, uh, anything going wrong can throw sleep off. Things going wrong in other systems can throw sleep off and interfere with sleep being restorative and happening at all. And so we're going to talk some about that as well. So as you all know, sleep is one of the basic human functions that you need to do to live, right up there with eating and drinking. If you don't sleep, you can go for, most people will fall asleep without trying to if they miss more than one consecutive night of sleep. If people miss more sleep than that for whatever reason, most people after a third night or so will start having sensory distortions, hallucinations, things like that. If you stay up much longer than that, you risk running into heart palpitations and other forms of organ insufficiency and exhaustion that can be dangerous. But for the most part, the most dangerous thing about sleep deprivation, as far as immediate dangers, is that you can fall asleep when you don't mean to fall asleep, and that could include, while you're driving or while you're doing something where it would cause you or someone else to get injured. It can also just interfere with your life. That can be a problem too. If you are supposed to be at work and then you oversleep because you miss sleep, that's a common enough sort of problem, but it can, under the right circumstances, throw a real wrench in somebody's life situation. Over the more long term, sleep deprivation tends to put a strain on the heart, the endocrine system, and the kidneys, and that can result in shortened shortened functioning of any of those parts. So it's really important for longevity and for feeling good that people get enough sleep. And because sleep is a really common thing for people to seek herbal remedies for. Conventional sleep aids are often addictive or habit forming at the very least. And they often will make people feel drowsy the following day. And that's usually not what people are looking for. They want better sleep so that they don't feel exhausted the next day. And if the medicine that makes them sleep makes them feel exhausted the next day, that's not much help. So it's a very common thing for people to see an herbalist about. It's a very common thing for people to try home remedies for, partly because it's often not that serious of an issue or not that immediate of an issue that needs treatment, but it's also something that can make a big difference in somebody's life, and because some of the treatment options just aren't that satisfying for it. And I think that it's really important to take a sort of a multi-step approach to sleep, and that first of all, the first thing you want to do about sleep, about difficulty sleeping, if it's very minor and it's very new, is to maybe try and not do anything, but just try again to sleep. So in other words, it's not something you immediately need to start taking herbs for. Sometimes you might have a night of sleep where you aren't able to sleep because of stress, for instance. You're worrying about this or that, and it might keep you from feeling like you want to sleep or being able to fall asleep. And if that's the case, sometimes the best thing to do is just try and wear yourself out a little more, have a physically active day, try again the next day and see if it works, see if you get good sleep. If not, there are other things that you want to look at and that you might want to try. One of those things is, well, not really one of those things, but part of what you might want to look at is what's sometimes described as sleep hygiene. I kind of recommend not using this term when you're talking to other people, because people associate the term hygiene with cleanliness so strongly that it tends to confuse them. But if you read about it, there's a lot written on the subject using this term, and sleep hygiene is sort of an overall term for healthy sleeping habits, healthy sleeping practices. And that can include things like, do you have a comfortable place to sleep? Usually if something is, soft enough, but not too soft, it's comfortable to sleep on, it doesn't make you sore when you sleep on it, you don't, wake up the next day in pain because you slept on something that was too saggy or too hard. Sort of things that you do before going to sleep, like having a process where you wind down, maybe, change into pajamas and brush your teeth and then go to sleep, maybe read, something like that. That's very important. I think a problem that a lot of people run into in modern times, and not just in very modern times, but really in the last couple generations, is that people are looking at their electronic devices while they're trying to go to sleep, whether that's, a television or phone or whatever. And a lot of people have theorized that this has to do with the light and the frequencies of light and things like that that come from the devices. And the body is definitely sensitive to light, although I'm not convinced with the frequency of light thing that has as much to do with it as some people think. But I think that one thing that definitely does play a role in it is that people are usually not engaging with really boring content. They're watching something exciting, and that makes them excited, which is the opposite of falling asleep. So, sometimes, sure, reading something or watching something can be calming, can distract you from whatever stresses are on your mind and stuff like that. So sometimes that does help people fall asleep. But if they're having trouble falling asleep, it might be a good idea to try not doing that, not engaging in any sort of entertainment, because being entertained is kind of something that keeps your mind alert, keeps you awake. And if you're, watching something very dramatic or scary, or, reading the latest enraging and worrying news from your favorite news source, then, none of that is really conducive to good sleep. So I think that is an issue for a lot of people. And that could be an issue for books too, depending on what you're reading. But a lot of the time, books for a lot of people are not as immersive of an experience as watching something. They're not, they kind of require, they're not as passive of a medium, because you actually have to read the thing rather than just sit there and having, everything acted out in front of you. So, stepping back from engaging in content and using devices and things like that might be a really important thing to consider or try for someone who's having trouble sleeping. Some people will say, I need the noise. I can't fall asleep when there's a lot going on, or when there's nothing going on, and then their brain is just, their brain keeps them awake if they don't have something, some sort of sound, some sort of input going on. And I hear that more from older people. I'm not exactly sure why that is. But I hear that more from older folks, that they need to have, something going on in the background, some background noise for them to be able to rest. So for some people, that's the case. And if it is, there might be some other things to work on that might keep that from being the case. But, it's important to realize that there is no one size fits all as far as these sorts of things go. But that it's often the case that engaging with exciting content will excite people and keep them from sleeping as easily. So that's a thing to be aware of. Eating is also another thing that affects sleep. This part of sleep hygiene is the eating habits in the hours leading up to sleep. And a lot of people would say don't eat right before you go to sleep because of various different reasons. And again, this is something that differs a lot from one person to the next in terms of how they feel about it. If someone is hungry a lot, they're probably going to have a hard time falling asleep when they're hungry. Hunger and sleep don't really go together. When your body is hungry, it tends to send messages to you to go find food. That's essentially what hunger is. It's an urge that you want to go find some food and eat it. And that's not really compatible with sleeping. Whereas once you have slept, once you have eaten, your body might go into a more of a rest and digest phase where you're done for the day, you're fed, now you just need to lay there and digest the food and sleep. And that's how it works for some people. The opposite of that is that in some other people, eating will trigger some elevation of their blood sugar, make them feel more energetic because they're deriving energy from the food that they've consumed. And also they might have indigestion or a sensation of movement in their stomach from food being digested, or heartburn or something like that would keep them from sleeping. So in those people, they still don't want to go to bed hungry. Nobody really wants to go to bed hungry. But in those people, eating the last food several hours before sleep, like maybe 3 to 6 hours before sleep, might be helpful. In other people, having a snack right before bed is really helpful and really helps to calm their system down. A warm drink that isn't caffeinated might also help. Caffeine consumption can also be a big factor and a big part of what people might call sleep hygiene. Most American adults consume caffeine on a daily basis. And again, people are very different in terms of how that affects them. And some people need to stop drinking caffeine, many hours, maybe even 12 hours before. And for some people, they probably shouldn't do it at all. Some people find that if they quit caffeine completely, they actually get better sleep. And that's important to realize. And for a lot of people, there's this kind of terrible situation where they drink alcohol in the evening to go to sleep and then caffeine in the morning to wake up. And that's just really hard on your system. That's really, that's a very harsh use of your nervous system, because you're going to have stimulants and sedatives in your system around the clock if you do that. They're both going to be in your system 24 hours a day, because they take a while to get all used up. Even though caffeine gets used up, let's see how I put this. Caffeine has a short half-life. So when you drink caffeine, half of the caffeine that you consumed is no longer caffeine or no longer in your system within a couple hours. But there's still some left in your system for longer, for the whole day, really. It's just that it declines in amount. It's still, there's still detectable amounts of it in your system for around the clock after you've had it. So, having that, and the alcohol is the same way. Alcohol takes longer to get processed, but there's still going to be some alcohol in your system from having had alcohol the previous night while you're drinking your morning coffee. And so having both in your system at the same time, is like pressing on the gas pedal and the brake at the same time in your nervous system. And so it's gonna, in some cases, it can cause confusion. It can cause bad sleep. It can cause you to not feel fully awake when you're awake and not feel fully asleep when you're asleep. And that can be kind of miserable. So, you know, neither substance is necessarily great for you. Both of them are very pervasive in our society, and trying to tell somebody to stop using either one is only going to be met with any success if they've already decided that for themselves. But you know, you can at least tell people about that and let them make their choices. So all of those things kind of fall under the category of sleep hygiene, making sure you have a good, comfortable place to sleep, making sure that your intake of food and drugs and entertainment is compatible with your need for sleep. Sleeping in the dark, you know, not sleeping with too much light interfering with it, because our system is set up to sleep in the dark for the most part. We're meant to have dark make us sleepy and light make us wake up. And you know, in the world of artificial light that we live in, it's very difficult to get as much of that as you would naturally get. You know, a lot of people notice if they go camping that they feel like going to sleep shortly after it gets dark, because they're in the dark, and the dark is all around them. And then, you know, after it gets light, people wake up, and you know, it's often a very different schedule than they would be keeping in their regular lives. I'll be right back. So all of that is really important to consider before you ever start trying to put herbs in somebody to try and help them with their sleep. The other thing to consider too is physical activity. If someone is not using their body a whole lot, sometimes that will make them feel restless. If somebody is doing a lot of physical work, that can make them feel tired, of course, as long as it's not making them feel really sore, which soreness and pain can be a major interfering thing with sleep. And so that brings me to my next category of things, which is, besides sedation, what else might you do to help somebody get better sleep? And relieving pain is one of those things. If somebody has a lot of pain in their body, obviously that's going to make it harder for them to sleep for the most part. So working with some of the things that we've talked about before for inflammation can help with that. Also, heat tends to be relaxing and pain relieving. So something like a hot water bottle for abdominal pain can be really helpful with sleep, or heated up rice bag or heating pad for the lower back, something that's just relaxing to those muscles. That can be really helpful for sleep. Some of the things like the salicylates that we talked about, the willow bark, for instance, that can be really helpful with sleep if pain is interfering with sleep. It's not sedative on its own in any way. And I don't recommend using sedative pain relievers to try and help people sleep, because they tend to, I mean, sometimes maybe, but not as a first line of treatment, because they tend to produce something other than a good, normal state of sleep. So that's something that you want to look at. Is the person in any pain? And a lot of the time, if they are muscle pain, can be relieved with heat, massage, things like that. There can be physical methods. any pain can be treated with some of the anti-inflammatory herbs we've talked about, and those can be good approaches to helping people sleep as well. Obviously, I mentioned digestive issues can interfere with sleep, which sometimes not having a lot of digestion going on can be part of that. But also, if somebody has any sort of digestive blockage, constipation, something like that, that's going to make people feel sometimes kind of restless, kind of just not very good, and can interfere with getting good quality of sleep. There usually isn't a whole lot of movement in the digestive tract while people are sleeping, or at least it slows down, but there is some. Another system that really interferes with sleep a lot, and can be serious, is the respiratory system. Being able to breathe while you are asleep is really like the difference between sleeping and being dead, right? So if you can not breathe very well while you're asleep, if you're having sleep apnea, snoring, things like that, that can really interfere with your sleep, and interfere with the sleep of people around you as well. But if somebody has a lot of congestion, postnasal drip, coughing, things like that, something like mullein can really help. But you don't want to give it to the person right before they fall asleep. You want to give it to the person at dinner time. That way they're able to like cough up whatever they need to be coughing up and be decongested by the time it's time to go to sleep. Spicy herbs are also good for this sort of thing. They're going to break up congestion. They're going to open up the airways, and they're going to be done doing that by the time somebody's ready to go to sleep. So it's not like they've got a really churning belly full of spicy herbs, and it's not like they're having a lot of drainage and things like that while they're trying to go to sleep. So that's that can be another area that is important to look at. And with that, you want to make sure that what you're using is not going to have too much of an effect on the sleep itself. So again, you don't want to give somebody a tincture of opium to make their coughing stop, because it's going to make them sedated. Not that you would be using tincture of opium anyway. That's just kind of a silly extreme example. But you want to use something that's not going to be stimulating or sedating. Cherry bark is something I usually don't use a lot before sleep, just because it does kind of slow the breathing down in a way that's not necessarily what we're going for. It causes respiratory suppression, in other words, and I don't like to do that. I would rather give somebody something like mint, horehound, eucalyptus, anything like that that's going to just be aromatic and opening up the airways. And those things usually actually help promote better breathing during sleep, and don't cause, for the most part, don't cause sedation. One exception to that is lavender, which I'll talk about in a little bit. It does cause some sedation, but it's very, very mild in that regard. So another thing that interferes with sleep, some other things that do interfere with sleep, hormonal changes can obviously interfere with sleep. If people are having night sweats, hot flashes, this sort of thing is kind of associated a lot with menopause, but it really can happen at other times in life too. It can happen during adolescence, it can happen in old age. Just when there's a lot of shifting going on with the hormones, sometimes that keeps people from being asleep. Young people often have a lot of insomnia just because they have a lot of steroids in their system, and those keep people from sleeping. So testosterone, human growth hormone, aldosterone, various other steroids that the body produces actually produce a strong sense of wakefulness and alertness that can really make it hard to fall asleep. And you don't want to suppress these things. You don't want to do anything that's going to interfere with them, because they are just kind of, doing some necessary work in the body. They're helping people's bodies change from, into a more adult form. But when they are doing this and interfering with sleep, sometimes it's good to compensate for the sleep destroying aspect of them with something that helps promote sleep. Okay, just a second. There's a question: are there herbs that are helpful for sleep apnea instead of using a CPAP machine? There's nothing that really does what a CPAP machine does, but a lot of the time, if you work on supporting the lymph system, you can cause a reduction in swelling in the adenoid glands, which are sometimes involved in sleep apnea, the pharyngeal tonsils. So that can make a difference. Sometimes that can make a difference with sleep apnea and people being able to breathe while they're asleep. And sometimes the aromatic herbs that I mentioned, things like mint, sometimes those help too, because they have a sort of a cooling and soothing effect on the respiratory tract. And a lot of the time in people with sleep apnea, there is some tightness and inflammation in the sinuses and the respiratory tract and things that are contributing to that sleep apnea. So that's something that sometimes helps. Oddly enough, sometimes a very small amount of stimulant herbs will help too, but that's not necessarily something to try out without. That's something that is without, if you're not able to really look at the whole situation and get a detailed history and everything, that's as likely to not work as it is to work. It just depends on the individual situation. So that's more of a little more of an advanced approach, but it sometimes is a thing that can be helpful. But yeah, the aromatic herbs are sometimes good for that. And some sleep promoting herbs that have some anti-inflammatory properties too, which I'll talk about here in a few minutes once I get through talking about some of the other barriers to sleep that come up from other parts of other systems of the body. So. Let's see, where was I? Right. So any time that there's any sort of irritation, inflammation, that can affect sleep, and then hormonal things can affect sleep. Thyroid is thrown off, that will affect sleep often dramatically in either direction, depending on what the thyroid is doing. And then the other thing is stress, which is, we think of stress as being a mental thing, but it is also an endocrine system thing. It's kind of, it's simultaneously worked on by the nervous system and the endocrine system. So while you are worrying about things in your brain, your glands are producing different substances like cortisone that are there to make you alert and strong and resilient to injury and things like that, that are not necessarily germane to most of the stresses that we have in modern life. They were they made sense in, they made sense for our wilder ancestors. If you were stressing about something, it probably meant you were going to get attacked by an animal or in a fight with another cave person or something like that. And in those cases, you would want the extra steroids. But if it's just stuff with work and bills and things like that, it doesn't really help to have them. So, but they're there, and they do interfere with sleep quite a lot. They not only interfere with how easy it is to get to sleep, but they interfere with the quality of sleep. In the normal course of things, your body goes through different phases of sleep. It goes through sort of an introductory phase of sleep, and then a falling asleep phase. It goes through dream sleep, and it goes through deep sleep, where you're sleeping without dreaming. And all of those should be there. And then there's kind of a waking process too, coming out of sleep. And all of those should be there in order for it to be restorative. And if somebody is too tired, they're going to kind of fall right through the drifting off stage right into dream sleep, and that can result in disturbing dreams, nightmares, things like that, which can throw you back out of sleep or make your sleep stressful, make it so that your heart's racing while you're asleep instead of beating very slowly, that sort of thing. So it's not necessarily restorative. So if somebody's coming to me and asking about sleep, some of the things that I ask about are, how hard is it for you to get to sleep? How is falling asleep for you? Do you wake up a lot? And do you have dreams that you remember? And then do you feel rested when you wake up in the morning? And people should feel rested when they wake up in the morning. They should remember at least having dreams. They might not remember all the content of them. It's not necessarily that important, but they should at least be going through that phase of sleep, and they will usually be able to remember that they did if they're getting very good quality sleep. And they should be, it's normal for people to wake up a time or two during the night. If they're waking up a lot, it's usually either their breathing or their bladder. Sometimes it's other things. Sometimes they're having a lot of stress, a lot of nightmares and things like that if they're under extreme duress. Sometimes people who have been through traumatic situations, even if those traumatic situations were 70 or 80 years ago, sometimes that really alters how watchful and wakeful people are, and makes it so that people really have a difficult time properly getting to sleep, properly staying asleep. It's like part of their brain is always vigilant, always on the lookout, and that can really wear somebody out. It can really be exhausting, and a lot of the time how that manifests in somebody's everyday life is depression. People get really depressed when they're sleep deprived, and but conversely, depressed people often want to sleep a lot, want to sleep 18 hours a day and stuff like that, which might actually be helpful to them if it were, practical, but it usually isn't. And of course, it can be kind of depressing to be sleeping through your whole days and not doing anything either. But physiologically, it might be helpful. But so this emotional history, mental history can make a big difference in how people sleep, even if, like I said, the situations that made them have those sleep habits may be very far in the past. It doesn't always automatically go away with time. People say that time heals all wounds, but that is a vast overgeneralization. Time heals some wounds, but some things really stick with people, and it's not always based on how severe the situation is. It's just kind of how much of an impression it made on that person at that time. So that's something to be aware of. It's can be sort of invasive to ask about that sort of thing. If somebody's, you don't necessarily want to ask too much about somebody's personal history if they haven't invited you to do so, but you can ask about if they're talking to you about their sleep. It's okay to ask about, do you feel like you're able to get fully asleep, or do you feel like you're kind of a very light sleeper who's easily alarmed and woken up out of sleep. And that's kind of the important part as far as intervention goes. So with the endocrine system, there are some herbs that help with that. Most of them are not things you would want to take in the night. So an herb that I really like, some of the herbs that I really like for helping the endocrine system cope with stress would include holy basil, which is a variety of basil. Ocimum basilicum is its Latin name. And ginseng also helps people cope with stress. Other relatives of ginseng, the Aurelias, do too. And those are native plants here in Kentucky. Aurelia spinosa is the most common one. Aurelia nudicalis is also here, and Aurelia racemosa. And both of those are traditional medicinal plants, but not necessarily something that's widely traded in commerce. But the Tulsi is widely traded in commerce and is a very popular remedy in the traditional medicine of India and also of Eastern Europe. So it's definitely something you can get a hold of pretty easily. Those things help the body help the endocrine system not be as affected by emotional stress, and help to keep that from having so much of an effect on sleep. But you should take them in the morning, not at night. So they're kind of helping with circadian rhythms, but you don't want to take them at night because they might cause some wakefulness too. All right. So to talk about some of the herbs that are more directly working on the nervous system to help with sleep. This depends a lot on what the nervous system is doing. But as I mentioned back when we were talking about the nervous system specifically, there are a whole bunch of herbs that we call hypnotic sedatives or nervine sedatives. A hypnotic sedative means that it produces a state of sleep that is basically similar to normal sleep. A nervine sedative means that that it's calming and that it's nourishing to the nervous system. And a lot of the time, nervines are also hypnotic sedatives. And there's a whole bunch of them because, like I said, these are things. This is a thing that people have often used home remedies and herbal medicine for, and so it's something that a lot of there are a lot of traditions around which remedies people use to help promote sleep. Probably the most common one worldwide is chamomile. And chamomile is drunk as a tea. It can also be taken as tincture. You can do other things with it as well. But it contains some really calming substances. It tends to help people get off to sleep. It doesn't usually make people feel drowsy. It's sort of short acting, like it makes you fall asleep, and then the next day, or even like 6 hours later or whatever, it's pretty much not going to still be working on you very much anymore. But it really helps people to get there in the first place, helps to calm the nerves and promote sleep. And because it's very mild, because it's not very strong, it's very popular and very widely used. There are a lot of stronger herbs, but a lot of the time that's not what people want with sleep. They want the mildest possible thing that will be effective. And so chamomile is often that, or is, one of the most accessible and most well tolerated sleep aids. There's a question about holy basil, whether it's normal to feel extremely tingly all over and almost shaky after taking it. I think that is not necessarily, the tingly part is not something I've necessarily experienced or heard, but it definitely does make people feel energized after taking it a lot of the time. It definitely changes how you feel on pretty short notice. So depending on exactly on what that feeling feels like, yeah, that's probably normal. It's probably just kind of the stimulating effect that it's having on your nervous system, which, you know, should be fairly short-lived in terms of any kind of really like feeling stimulated, but it's going to make people feel more uplifted in general throughout the day. I really like holy basil for stress and especially for grief. It's my probably my favorite herb for helping people work through grief and deal with grief and not have it be too overwhelming for them. So yeah, chamomile is a really useful herb in that regard. Lavender is another really widely used mild sleep aid. It is aromatic, so it does open up the airways. It also helps to promote sleep. It also kind of mildly works against the stimulating effect of hormones that keep people awake. So it can be really helpful if somebody is having stress related or change of life related difficulty sleeping. It can help with both the endocrine system and the nervous system, and also the respiratory system, because it's just opening up the airway, decongesting, kind of cooling the airways. It has a very cooling flavor and feel to it. It also promotes good digestion. So it's kind of, it works on a lot of the things that we've talked about, that I've talked about tonight. And so it's a really good thing. And I've often combined chamomile and lavender as a tea. I often would give that to my kids if they were having trouble sleeping, taking it myself a lot of times too, especially when I was having trouble sleeping as a result of stress. It's really much more, it's much better for you than drinking alcohol to help you relax to sleep, but it has a similar effect of just really taking the edge off of the stress that a lot of people describe alcohol as having. But it doesn't tend to have a very negative effect on your system. So that can be a really useful thing. Lavender and chamomile together. Like I said, I usually would make a tea out of that. I find the warm liquid to be really soothing too. But if somebody came to me in the clinic, I would probably give it to them in a tincture form rather than a tea form, just because it's easier for them to use. But either one is going to do the same sorts of things medicinally. It's just a matter of which delivery system makes more sense for the person's individual situation. Another herb that is not as widely used here in the United States, but it's very popular in Europe and seemed to be very popular in Mexico when I was there as well, is tilia. Tilia is the flower of the linden tree. I mean, tilia is the linden tree, but the flower of it is the part that is used medicinally. It's very uncomplicated. Oh yeah, Becca is mentioning that her kids came up with a recipe for sleep and stress that has chamomile, lavender, and passion flower. And you gave me some of that, didn't you? I think you gave me a little bit of that when you.
Yes, I did actually.
Yeah, I had some of that. That was nice. Yeah, linden flowers. So Jennifer McCoy says linden flowers smell amazing. They really do smell nice. and sometimes you can smell the tree from a ways off when they're blooming. Bees love them, honeybees love them. So they're a really nice thing that you can gather a whole bunch of pretty easily. You know, if you got a linden tree, it will make lots and lots of flowers. And the tea that's made from them has a nice body to it. It's sort of soothing. It's a little bit soothing to the airways as well, kind of moistening to the airways, I would say. And so it's a good herb to know about. It's kind of available for a short time during the year when that tree is in flower, but it's a really good one. And like I said, it's a very popular remedy in Eastern Europe, fairly seemingly popular in Mexico as well. We see it in grocery stores and things like that. Interestingly, the biggest, or one of the biggest American tilia trees, American linden trees, is here in Lexington. If you get a chance to go and see it, if you live around here, I recommend it. It is by the Henry Clay Monument in Lexington Cemetery. And the tree is about 8 feet across. The trunk of the tree is about as wide as the length of a 2x4. Or if you laid it on its side, it would be about as wide as the height of this room. So it's a very large tree, very massive tree. A big chunk of it fell off several years ago, the crown, in a storm, but it's recovered from it, and it's still growing. And yeah, it's a very massive tree. And if you look at the base of the tree, it kind of reminds me of African baobab trees in terms of how the way it's shaped and the sort of the texture of the tree, like it's got like curly wood. Anyway, you should see it. It's very interesting. But both baobab trees and linden trees are in the mallow family. They're in the same family that produces chocolate and cotton and many other important medicinal and economic plants. Okra, marshmallow, hollyhocks, they're all in the same family of plants that tend to be demulcent. They tend to have demulcent, slimy properties to their fruits, which linden does also with if you wait and gather the seeds. And it's this one in particular is a really good mild sedative. I would say that it's even probably milder than chamomile in terms of its sleep producing properties. So lavender, chamomile, tilia, all on the very low, very gentle end of things. Moving up a degree or so, you've got skullcap and motherwort, which are still producing very normal sleep, but they're a little more insistent about it. They're a little longer lasting, a little more strongly calming. There's another herb called lobelia, which is pretty strong. It's not really a sleep promoter, but it is calming to the muscles, and it is opening to the airways. And so sometimes that is really helpful for people who are either sore or have a lot of hacking cough or something like that. Where I'm from, lobelia is kind of traditionally thought of as like similar to, but a remedy for tobacco. So, it can help with some of the problems that smoking causes. If you take too much lobelia, it will cause vomiting. So it's something you would take in drops, but it's not really poisonous because it's just emetic. It's just something that will induce vomiting. But a few drops of it under the tongue can be helpful. And can be kind of on the same strength level as as skullcap and motherwort, but it can only be used in very small doses. So those are some other good sleep herbs that help people to fall asleep. And passion flower is somewhere around that same level of strength. Passion flower, I really like passion flower for helping people stay asleep. If somebody tells me I fall asleep easily, but I wake up and then I have a hard time getting back to sleep, I'll usually give them some passion flower, maybe along with other things. But passion flower keeps that thing from happening where when you wake up, you wake all the way up instead of just being a little bit awake. We have this normal thing that happens where what's supposed to happen is you wake up in the middle of the night, you kind of check your surroundings, make sure everything's safe. Maybe you go use the bathroom, then you lay back down and you fall right back asleep. But sometimes what happens is you wake up and then you're fully awake and you can't get back to sleep. So passion flower helps to keep that from happening if you take it right before sleep. Usually allows people to wake up, but keeps them from being unable to fall back asleep when they do so. So I like it pretty well for that, and often combining it with other herbs as well, depending on the exact situation of the person. But it's a really good herb. Passion flower is something you can find growing in the summer here. It's a very tropical looking plant with a very exotic looking flower, and has a lovely fruit that grows on it as well. But the vine, the whole vine, we say passion flower because that's the name of the plant, but it's the whole vine that's used, minus the fruit perhaps. But the vine, when it's in flower, is harvested, and that's the part that's dried and used medicinally. Yeah, and the passion flower fruit, the last of it is like happens in November. So you can often find it. It gets ripe earlier than that, but it will persist on the vine until basically after frost. So you can, if you have meadows, you can often find it growing, and it's about the size of a duck egg. It's one of the bigger native fruits. And you crack the fruit open or pop the fruit open, and it's got little seeds that are covered in fleshy stuff that tastes like candy. It tastes almost like an artificial flavor or something, like sour apple Jolly Rancher or something like that. Not really like that though. It has a flavor that's all its own, but it's very interesting. Yeah, so I really like passion flower as a sleep remedy. And like I said, sleep promoting herbs are not the first thing you should do. They're maybe like the third thing you should do, but when they are useful, when they are what you need to do, they can be really helpful. And so the probably my top ones would be chamomile, skullcap, and passion flower here in the clinic. And like I said, at home I use a lot of lavender and chamomile in tea form. And lavender and chamomile are both very easy garden plants. They grow. Chamomile is basically a weed. You scratch up the ground, you sprinkle on the seeds, and you cover it. It just kind of grows. If you give it the right kind of soil, which is like sandy, well-drained soil, it will grow for you, and it will often reseed itself and keep growing in the same place for a long time. We also have a wild chamomile that grows here. It's called Matricaria discoides or Matricaria matricarioides. Sometimes people call it wild chamomile. Sometimes people call it pineapple weed. But it is just a wild chamomile, and it has it has the disc, the yellow part of the center of chamomile. It doesn't really have the white petals around it, the rays, but looks and smells just like other chamomiles. Also, when I say chamomile, I should mention that there is Matricaria chamomile, which is pretty much always what I'm talking about when I'm talking about chamomile, which is sometimes called German chamomile, even though it's not specifically native or endemic to Germany. It may be native there, but it's native to lots of places. And then there's Anthemis, which is also called Roman chamomile, and they're medicinally similar. But I am, unless I say otherwise, always talking about Matricaria when I talk about chamomile. Yeah, so I usually just call Roman chamomile Anthemis. Its Latin name, its Roman name, if you will. But it is a very similar plant. It's not in the same genus, but it looks very similar and smells pretty similar as well. So those are all really good sleep aids. Some other things that you might encounter in sleep remedies that I don't like as well as sleep aids, although they do have their places, but they're not as generally applicable as sleep aids, would be valerian is one of them. Valerian, I think of valerian as an anticonvulsant, muscle relaxer. It's relaxing. It does help people fall asleep, but a lot of people have weird dreams when they've taken it. So that's one herb that it does promote sleep, or it helps people fall asleep, but mainly I would consider it a muscle relaxer rather than or a mood stabilizer in some cases, but not so much one of the first herbs I would reach for as a sleep aid. Another thing in that same category is California poppy, which is a narcotic pain relieving herb. Wild lettuce too. These things help with pain. They're sedating, but the state of sedation they produce is not really sleep. It's sleep-like, but if that's what you're trying to get for sleep, you're not necessarily going to get the restorative processes of normal sleep that are like resetting your nervous system and recalibrating your circadian rhythms and everything like that. Kratom is another one that's popular recently. People don't use it as much for sleep, but some people do. For some people, it's more energizing, but again, it's something that is interacting with the opioid receptors. So it is potentially having a sleep-inducing effect, but it's not really promoting regular sleep, normal sleep state. Kava is the same way. Kava is more along the lines of what valerian is. It's a muscle relaxer. It might make people feel sleepy. Alternately, some people it makes feel giddy and laugh and stuff like that. It's a good herb. It has its uses, but it's not one of my favorite ones for promoting sleep, or at least when I say not one of my favorite ones, not one of the ones that I would use most broadly, not one of the ones that I would consider to be applicable in most situations. Whereas chamomile, lavender, passion flower, you can use those with just about everybody who's having a hard time sleeping, and it's going to help them sleep better. Mugwort is another one. People take mugwort sometimes. Mugwort produces vivid dreams. It doesn't really that's the thing about mugwort is people sometimes will take it. Some people it definitely makes feel very sleepy. Some people it doesn't, but a lot of the time people will have very vivid dreams after having had it. And it's kind of like it's stimulating the central nervous system, and so sometimes that's resulting in more mental activity during sleep than would normally be there. Although for some people who are having a hard time getting to sleep and other things aren't helping them, sometimes that is helpful. And the same is true of the valerian and the kava. Sometimes they're helpful for getting people to sleep who are having a hard time getting to sleep, even with the other aids. But not one of the things that I consider most broadly applicable. Oh, nice. You made a mugwort oil from mugwort. Yeah, it's got mugwort has some really nice sagey artemisia type substances in it that are very aromatic, and I've heard of people putting it in little like sachets or pillows where people can smell it while they're asleep. And again, sometimes this is done specifically for the purpose of inducing a lot of dreaming, but it does smell nice. I just gathered a bunch of Artemisia annua, Sweet Annie, which smells very similar and is nearly the same plant. But just harvested a bunch of that, and my car still smells like it days later because I had a couple big paper bags of it in the back of my vehicle. All right, let's see. So got a couple herbs that I want to talk about today. And one that I want to talk about, oh, hang on a second. Yeah, should definitely address that. So Kim is asking about what herbs for men and women help strengthen the urinary system with aging to support less nighttime waking. So yeah, that is definitely something I need to address, because people often wake up because they have to pee. There are a couple of herbs that are really useful for this in men and women. In men, there's kind of additional goings on where there's swelling of the prostate, which can make it so that when they pee, they're not able to empty their bladder all the way. And so that might result in them having to get up again sooner. In both men and women, there is just sort of sensitivity and lack of muscle strength in the bladder and in the urinary tract that can make it so that people feel the urge to urinate more frequently. So some of the things that help with this, cranberry is helpful if you take it earlier in the day. You don't want to take it late in the day because it's going to make people have to pee more. But it does have an anti-inflammatory effect on the urinary tract. Blueberries do too, dietarily. So that's going to kind of help clear things out, help reduce the acidity of the urine, and it might reduce inflammation and irritability in the urinary tract. Benzoin gum, which is a type of tree sap that is native to the Middle East, is something that I use pretty often in men and women. You can take it internally and it really decreases bladder sensitivity. Petasites, which what is petasites called in English? Oh, butterbur. Butterbur, that is an herb that is native to Europe, that's pretty widely used in commerce, as well as something to help with urinary urges and frequency. Uva ursi is helpful for men and women. As far as the prostate thing in men goes, pumpkin seed oil or nettle root oil are both very good. Saw palmetto really isn't that good. It's not bad or anything, it's just not very strong. So the nettle root oil and the pumpkin seed oil both seem to help a lot with the swelling of the prostate, which kind of, like I said, restricts the flow of urine. So that makes it easier to empty the bladder. And the other herbs that I mentioned help with men and women to keep the keep the lining of the bladder from being so sensitive so that the muscles of the bladder are not contracting as easily in response to them. And yeah, that is one of the more frequent things that makes people have to wake up more than once in the night. The benzoin gum is something that I would use in tincture form. I would usually have people take a dropper full of it, maybe twice a day, small amounts of it. It just has a soothing effect on the urinary tract. There's an herb, there's a lichen called reindeer moss that I also use, but it's kind of it's very easily over harvestable, so it's something that you have to gather with care because it's a very slow growing species. It's the sort of thing where you might go to a place and gather one little clump of it and go somewhere else and gather another clump of it and not take too much from any one place, because it can you can have a clump of it that's this big, and depending on the growing conditions, it might be 100 years old. So if you're going to gather one this year, you need to leave 99 other ones so that you're not depleting the population. Yeah, blueberries are they're really good. They've got a lot of anti-inflammatory stuff in them. Cranberries have less of the same anti-inflammatory stuff, but they also have some some more diuretic properties, which depending on, so with interstitial cystitis, they probably wouldn't help as much. If it was more a reaction to stuff in the diet and things like that, they might help more. So yeah, those are both definitely things that can be helpful. And then of course, water intake, having more water intake earlier in the day and then less as you get close to evening is something that a lot of people figure out on their own that can be helpful. The other thing that is helpful with that sometimes is working on the nervous system. These nervine herbs actually will sometimes really help with that because they're soothing the nerves so that there's not as much of a spastic type of action happening, where the muscles around the bladder are squeezing it. And they also probably help with the body responding more to light, changes in light. Because normally when you're asleep, your body should be producing some stuff that keeps you from having to pee as often. Something people call anti-diuretic hormone, but it's produced by the pituitary gland, and it's something that would normally be more present while you're asleep, but in older people sometimes it isn't. Especially if people are like in their 70s or older, a lot of the time they're not producing as much of this anti-diuretic hormone during their sleep phase as they would normally be. And so that's going to mean that their kidneys are continuing to function at full strength and their bladder is filling up maybe 4 to 6 times in the night rather than once, which would be pretty normal. All right. Okay, so one of the herbs that I would like to talk about today is oregano. Oregano is very well known as a culinary spice. It is native to the Mediterranean, but you can grow it here in Kentucky. You can grow it in England and Ireland. So it's pretty flexible as far as where it will grow if it's grown. But it's native mostly to a Mediterranean climate. And marjoram is a very similar plant, but oregano is kind of a more little, I don't know, I guess you could say a more intense version of it. It has a lot of volatile oils in it, a lot of aromatic substances, which include thymol, which is the same stuff that makes thyme taste the way that it does, and also another one called carvacrol, which is not contained in this one. And there's pulajone, which is kind of another, that one's also contained in pennyroyal. So it has a lot of the minty stuff from other mint family members, but it is a very savory mint. So it's a member of the mint family. It's bushy looking, has small leaves, but it's more, more of a savory flavored mint. It doesn't have menthol, or at least not in any meaningful quantity. So it doesn't taste like spearmint or peppermint, but it tastes like thyme and sage and pennyroyal and rosemary, and that's that side of the mint family flavor profile. So it's good for a couple of different sets of things. One of them is that the aromatic substances in it are really good for the respiratory system. They're cooling, they're decongestant, they're opening to the respiratory system, and they're also really good at killing bacteria and funguses. So if you are if you're sick and you're trying to not get a bacterial infection in your lungs, oregano can be really helpful with that, because it's going to break up congestion, and it's also going to actually, when you drink it, these aromatic substances actually get absorbed into your bloodstream and they come out in your lungs. So they come out through the secretions of the lungs and get breathed out. And because they're doing that, they're going to be killing any bacteria, funguses, things like that that are trying to set up shop in your lungs. So if you, I've used this a lot in people, this and thyme both, in people who are sick and who I didn't want that sickness to develop into pneumonia, but was concerned that it might. I never wanted to, but sometimes I'm not very concerned about it as a potential outcome, and sometimes I am. But it's helpful for that. It's really good for also if somebody's just got a lot of congestion in their head that isn't moving. Oregano can really help with that. It'll also help to open up the blood vessels. If it's taken internally, it will help to open up the blood vessels and reduce blood pressure. So it can be a pretty good herb for blood pressure. Oregano was one of my dad's favorite medicinal remedies, and he used it quite a bit. He used it in his cooking, and he used it in his medicining pretty extensively. So it's kind of something that has sentimental value to me as an herb for that reason. But it's a really strong and versatile medicine for infections. It's been tested in vitro against a lot of different infectious organisms, and it has a very wide, broad spectrum of activity against gram-positive, gram-negative, against funguses, lots of anaerobic bacteria, lots of different things. So it's a really broadly acting killer of germs. And it can be applied topically for those purposes. Like if you, because when you're looking at an in vitro study, it's basically like a topical thing. It's not necessarily the same as what would happen if you took something by mouth for an infection somewhere in your body. It might be, but it might not. But in terms of topical stuff, like rinsing out a wound with a wash made from oregano, just like a strong infusion of oregano used as a wash, that can, really help to prevent infection. And so that's something that I might use if I were to get an unclean wound, like if I were to step on something, cut myself on something that was not very clean, something like that, a higher risk injury for infection, where there's dirt or other contaminants that have been introduced into the wound channel, or a bite or something like that. It's useful for that. And if there is an actual wound like that, sometimes I will rinse it out with sometimes with the oregano wash, and then soak a piece of sterile gauze in oregano infusion, and then put that on the wound and keep that on the wound as sort of kind of a continuous exposure to these antibacterial substances so that the wound does not develop infection. I have given people oregano internally for situations where they had pockets of infection in their body, whether it was an abscessed tooth or whether it was something where they had maybe gotten injured and then the injury had sealed over but had some infection in it. And it does work in those situations. It does seem to work pretty well in those situations. So it's you know, if you could only have one herb for fighting bacteria, I think oregano would be a much better choice than most of them. Oregano, garlic, and myrrh are the three things I use most commonly in my practice for killing bacteria. And they're all very broadly acting. You know, you can use them for urinary tract infections. Some other things are a little more direct. You can use them for if somebody's gotten food poisoning, bacterial, intestinal type of situation from unclean food or water. It's useful for that. So it's got a really wide range of uses. If you are buying it, it's usually not that expensive. If you're growing it, you can grow a lot of it pretty easily. A second question here. Does oregano have any antiviral compounds? I am not entirely sure if we know the answer to that question. Oregano does contain some things like D-limonene that probably are antiviral. How antiviral they are in actual practice is kind of hard to say. Thymol probably is antiviral as well, and there's lots of that in oregano. But it's kind of hard to say exactly how that's going to translate into things working in the body. It's not the first herb that I would use for viruses. In fact, it's not even the 10th herb I would use for viruses. I mostly would use it for bacterial and fungal situations. Because if somebody has a viral illness, some other things are going to work better. Although I will say that if somebody has a febrile viral illness like the flu, or a respiratory viral illness like the flu, that oregano is going to make them feel better because, for one thing, it's going to make them sweat because of its aromatic, spicy character. It's going to make them sweat, and that will often break a fever. And also, it's going to open up the airways, which is often a place where viral infections colonize and enter the body and have symptoms. So even though it might not be actually killing viruses or keeping viruses from reproducing, it is often going to be a helpful herb to use in a viral illness, especially a viral respiratory illness. So I hope that that answers that question. All right. So yeah, it's a pretty accessible, widely available herb. You know, you can probably find it in a grocery store, even if it wasn't a place that actually sold herbal medicine, because it's you know, one of the herbs that people use for soup and things like that. So it's very common and widely available. And like I said, you know, if you have a place to garden, it's a good herb to grow if you want to grow medicinal herbs. Similarly to lavender, it's minty, but it grows in a bushy type of, as a bushy type of plant, and it will often in this environment persist through the winter and grow back in the spring, especially if you cover it and protect it a little bit from the frost. But even if you don't, there's a good chance that it'll return for you and keep producing. It doesn't tend to take over garden beds the way that lemon balm or spearmint do, but it's pretty easy to grow and pretty useful to have around. If you take it, one of the reasons that it's used in food is because it actually helps with the production of digestive juices, and it kind of makes things more digestible and also keeps people from developing as much gas when they're digesting food. So that's a feature that it shares with a lot of other aromatic herbs. But that's one of the reasons that it has been widely used in food. And the other reason is probably that it's antibacterial, because if you make a big pot of soup, you want it to last a few days before it goes bad. And in the days before refrigeration existed, the way that was accomplished was mostly through spices, through herbs like oregano acting as a preservative, and also keeping it hot most of the time. That will help too. Oh, just a second, I'll be right back. All right. The other herb I want to talk to you about today is buckthorn. There are multiple different kinds of buckthorn. The two kinds that grow around here are an invasive species, a Chinese buckthorn, and then there's also the native Carolina buckthorn. They look very similar. Medicinally, they're pretty much interchangeable. There's also a commercially grown species called Cascara sagrada, which is not its Latin name. That's the Spanish name. But Cascara sagrada is a widely sold herb, and its Latin name is Rhamnus or Frangula persiana. They've changed the name back and forth a couple of times, or different people use different names, I guess. But with all of these, they're used pretty much interchangeably. And the way that they're used is as a stimulant laxative. So the bark is peeled off of the tree or a branch of the tree, and then it's allowed to dry. And then that is either made into a tea or else powdered and taken in the form of a capsule or tablet or something like that. And if you don't let it dry, it has to dry and cure for a long time before it's ready to use. A lot of people say a year. It really doesn't take quite a year, but a year is a good long time to be on the safe side. If you use it fresh, it causes really bad cramping. If you let it dry out, that effect mellows quite a bit. But in any case, it's a really strong laxative. In the bark start coming out into the environment of your large intestine, where they get broken down by microbes. And one of those breakdown products from these sort of, I guess you could call them sugars or starches in the sweet compounds that are in the root get broken down by the gut bacteria, and then one of those breakdown products actually irritates or stimulates the lining of the large intestine and causes it to secrete more fluid, and also causes the muscles to cramp up. And this results in a really strong laxative effect. So this is what people would call a stimulant laxative, meaning that it works by irritating the large intestine into having an expulsive effect. And that's something that a lot of herbs do, a lot of laxatives do. But Cascara is one that's pretty, it's stronger than senna, which is another herb. I can't remember if we've talked about senna. I think we saw it on one of our herb walks, but it's a pretty strong laxative herb. So Cascara is stronger than senna. These kind of herbs, stimulant laxatives, should only be used occasionally because they're irritating, and if they're used frequently, they can cause inflammation that make it so that somebody doesn't have a lot of bowel motility unless they take a laxative. And that's, people call that laxative dependence, but it's basically just inflammation and irritation and dryness in the intestines, which will go away if it's allowed to, but it takes some time. So not using them too frequently is important, but it's a good thing to know how to use if the situation should arise. So the time you would want to use that is if there's an obstruction, if there's a blockage. Often I would use that after somebody has been on pain medicine, on opioids, because that tends to stop bowel motility. Or if somebody has been in a situation where they were either bedridden, not moving around much, something along those lines, where their lymph system is not getting a chance to circulate, and so they're not having a lot of fluid returning to their large intestine, and that tends to have people be dried out and have them unable to use the bathroom very easily, unable to empty their bowels very easily. So in those situations, Cascara can be good for getting things moving again initially. And then after that, you want to switch to something else. Which there are a lot of other gentler things. Fiber-based laxatives are good. Osmotic laxatives like molasses, or I use a sort of mulberry molasses called pecmez. Those can be useful after something has, after that initial plug has been moved, after that initial blockage, because when stool sits in the bowel for a long time, the water gets reabsorbed from it. It becomes this dry, hard thing that's very hard for the body to expel. And so that's exactly the situation that Cascara is helpful for. Helpful for getting things moving again after a situation like that, which, like I said, usually happens when somebody is on, when somebody's either not moving because they're bedridden, they're sick, something like that, or they're on narcotic pain medicine, and quite often both. If somebody gets badly injured, they're very likely going to spend a lot of time in bed, and they're very likely going to spend some time on narcotic pain relievers. And so I think very early on in my practice, not very early on, fairly early on in my practice, I worked with somebody who had broken their leg very badly, split one of the bones of their leg, and been incapacitated, and did not have a bowel movement for over a month. And they were just, they felt pretty miserable. And then finally I used an herb like this, a stimulant laxative, to try to get things moving. And then they felt much better, and they only really needed it once. And then once it had done what it needed to do, then they didn't really need it anymore. So when you're using that kind of an herb, adequate hydration is really, really vital. And if it's somebody who has a sensitive digestive system, it's often a good idea to use the cascara along with some aromatic herbs. Ginger is something that I would usually use along with it. Traditionally, there are also other herbs like licorice that are used along with it that are kind of both aromatic and somewhat stimulating to the liver. So these are some different ways you can approach it, but you know, there's likely to be, anytime there's that sort of blockage, there's likely to be some cramping, some pain and stuff as it's moving. So warming herbs along with it can be really helpful. Demulcent herbs can be helpful too, like fiber-based laxatives, things like oak bran, marshmallow root. Those can be helpful. Cinnamon is both warming and demulcent. It's slimy and spicy, so that can be a helpful thing too. Physical heat on the exterior of the body, like a heating pad or a hot water bottle, can be helpful as well. Oh, weird. No, maybe I'm actually talking like that. I don't know. Gretchen says she is experiencing some sound irregularities with her reception. I'm not sure if that's something anybody else is experiencing. But now I'm worried that I'm actually talking like that, but maybe not. Anyway, I'm going to drink some water. The other thing that is sometimes helpful, or I don't know if I would even call it an other thing, but something else, that some other things that are helpful in that sort of situation where you would be using cascara, or after you have used cascara and there's starting to be some abdominal cramping, is being submerged in hot water, taking a hot bath. Both provide some counter pressure from the outside and the heat that's relaxing. So that can be a good thing to do. And then you're not only getting adequate fluid, but also getting some movement if possible, so that the lymph is moving. And when the lymph moves, some of the lymph goes to the large intestine and helps to hydrate things there. That can be a helpful part of the process. So all of this, everything that I'm saying is really actually applicable anytime you're using a laxative herb that works by stimulating or irritating the large intestine. But buckthorn or cascara is a good example, a common example of an herb like that. And it's something that, you know, like I said, there are two species of it, two kinds of it that grow here in central Kentucky, one of which you should just kind of cut down all of every time you see it. The other one, you know, you can harvest sustainably. But the invasive species, you don't necessarily have to be sustainable when you're harvesting them. Neither one is especially environmentally sensitive. They both have berries, which means that they get distributed by birds, so they can crop up just about anywhere. And are, you know, very resilient to being harvested, but also, you know, with the native species, you do want to be more, at least respectful of it. And with the invasive species, you know, you might, in some cases, want to get rid of it just to keep it from spreading, even if you didn't need all that much of it. So that is cascara. So you bathe them in catnip tea. That's interesting. I have not come across that before, but of course it's going to be easier to do when someone is very small. All right, so uh, all right, so yeah, if you are going to be using strong laxatives, it's probably a good idea to have a plan for giving them along with something spicy. And like I said, ginger and cinnamon are kind of my go-to herbs as far as that goes. They're very well tolerated and very warming, and can be used in pretty much whatever quantity you like. And the cinnamon also contains some soluble fiber to some slipperiness and sliminess that helps things get going. One case that I used to always bring up when I was teaching med students was about somebody that I treated who had long-term constipation as a result of using oxycodone for years. And in that particular person, I just used cinnamon, and just the laxative effect and the warming effect, and the fact that it was making the digestive system move, eventually was able to not only cut down on the amount of oxycodone that she needed, but also make it so she didn't need any other laxatives, and so that she was not using as much of the other medicines that she was taking to deal with the side effects of the oxycodone. So was it can be a really helpful thing. Just keeping the intestines warm and moving is a very central point in a lot of traditions of herbal medicine. Just like I said very early on in this course, stagnation is often looked at as one of the central causes of malfunction in the body, and bowel stagnation, food stagnation is a big part of that. So cascara can be a really powerful herb to use occasionally for that sort of thing. And having some other herbs to use along with it is important. It's not really a dangerous herb, I wouldn't say. It is something that does have to be used with a certain degree of care and respect, both because using it all the time can lead to diminishing returns, and because using it can sometimes cause significant physical discomfort in the process of getting things to move. All right, so any questions about cascara, or about sleep, or about oregano?
I have a little question, actually.
Yeah.
You were kind of talking about stagnation and how that's like the central issue for most things. When you have someone who has stagnation, multiple areas of the body, for instance, bowel stagnation and kidney issues, kidney stones specifically, and prostate inflammation, all those things, like the body screaming, I need things to move. How would you go about treating something like that? Would you treat the lymph system, since it's sort of a central system? I mean, that's kind of what I'm thinking, but I'm just not sure how to go about something like that.
Yeah, that's part of it. So you would want to, three things basically. You would want to work on decreasing inflammation, making sure that there is not just adequate but really abundant hydration, such that that they would be peeing and having bowel movements and stuff frequently. And you would want to move the fluids in the body, which can be done by physical movement. It can be done with working on the lymph system, and it can be done with working on the liver and kidneys. So all of those things together, and the circulation. So all of those things together, moving the fluids, decreasing inflammation, and increasing hydration would be kind of something that I would pretty much always do in that situation. The specifics would differ from situation to situation on an individual basis, but those strategies of moving the fluids, decreasing inflammation, and increasing hydration would definitely be part of it. And yeah, working with the lymph system is part of the moving the fluids in the body, since that's where a lot of the fluid in the body is.
Thank you for that. I have a specific family member that has multiple issues like that, and they keep producing. I feel like the problem is in their kidneys, and then everything else has stemmed from that because the kidneys will not work properly.
Yeah, that is definitely a situation that you can find pretty often. So a lot of the time how it goes is that one organ or system will have a hard time for whatever reason, genetics or life history or whatever, and then that'll throw a bunch of other things off.
Yeah, it's a rough situation. Hundreds and hundreds of stones this person's passed, just crazy.
Oh, that's rough.
Yes.
That is indeed very rough. Well, be happy to talk to them if they're interested. But yeah.
Trust me, I've tried. He's very stubborn.
Right. Yeah. Hard to get them to move too, huh? But yeah. So that is a common type of situation to see, where you get just sort of something going wrong and then it compounding a bunch of other things not moving the way they should. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, some of you have started showing me some of the plant collections, and I'm really happy to see those, and excited to see more of them. And I hope everybody is enjoying that process or feeling good about that process. If you have any concerns about it or any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And yeah, like I said, I look forward to seeing more of those. And thank you to everybody who has made some financial contributions this month. I desperately need them, so I really appreciate them. And yeah, hope that everybody is doing well. And if you have any specific concerns about any of that, feel free to reach out to me. All right, so I will talk to you all again next week, and I'll try to get this video uploaded in a couple of days here, probably the day after tomorrow. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.